Hello from Lahinch, County Clare on the wild west coast of Ireland. I'm Rory McKiernan and you're very welcome to the Love and Courage podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I'm excited to share this great episode with you. My guest is Colm Mac Con Iomaire. He's an acclaimed Irish violinist and composer. He was a founding member of renowned folk fusion band Kila, and at the age of 19 became a founding member of legendary Irish indie rock band The Frames, which led him to tour the world for up on 30 years or so. He was also a member of the Swell season, and in recent times Colm has been focused on his solo career, and he's released 3 albums to great acclaim. He's also performed on albums by numerous other artists, including on the White Ladder album by David Gray and on O by Damien Rice. Colm has written music for several movies, TV, theatre and dance productions. He's also a passionate champion of the Irish language, and he's very politically and socially engaged and aware when it comes to social, cultural, political, environmental issues. And all around, he's a guy who I think oozes wit and wisdom, whilst also staying grounded, feet on the ground, and he's a great sense of fun and a great zest for life, as you'll hear as well. And just to say, this podcast is also available as a video version on the Love and Courage YouTube channel and on my Facebook page. Just look up Rory McKiernan Hitching for Hope on Facebook. And a heads up, we have a surprise special guest halfway through the podcast. Colm's son Darach makes an impromptu appearance and things go a bit off script for a couple of minutes, in case you're wondering what's going on. It's a bit more obvious than the video version. It's only a couple of minutes, but it might be confusing just if you're only hearing the audio. I chose not to edit this out because we get talking about Darach soon afterwards, and Darach makes another fun reappearance later on. So do stay tuned for that and stay with it as well. So back to Colm. I first met Colm 10 years ago or so when he performed at the Possibility Summit, which I was involved in organising. The Dalai Lama was the keynote speaker that day, and Colm joined Kila on stage for a musical celebration. It's certainly a day I'll never forget, and we stayed in touch afterwards, became friends, and over the years Colm performed at mine and Susan's wedding, which was an incredible honour, really. He features in my book, Hitching for Hope. In recent times, he also performed on Susan's album, her debut album, Into the Sea, alongside other musical luminaries, including Colm Queerney, Justin Carroll, Graham Hopkins and Robbie Malone. And that really is the big focus for me these days, supporting Susan as her album makes its way out into the world. Brand new album. It's an exciting adventure after several years working on it. A lot of love, a lot of labour of soul and a labour of love, as they say, and I'm so proud of her. It's an incredible piece of work. Every song finely crafted. They get better with every listen, and it's taken years. And you know, often good art and anything good takes years, and it's the right time for it as well. And it's an interesting time to be launching things, as I found myself with the book and so on. But it just feels like music has such a role to play in healing and solace and transformation and inspiring us to keep going. And it's great that now's the time for the album to come out. So I'm really excited. And I actually have one of her tracks at the end of this podcast. It's Hold On. You'll also hear Colm working his magic on it. So consider hanging back at the end of the conversation with Colm and you'll get to hear that song Hold On by Susan. That's Susan Quirk. And I'm pleased to say things are shaping up really nicely for the album. It's just out April 23rd, 2021. So very new, very fresh. And things shaping up well with national airplay, regional airplay, people getting behind it, buying the digital and signed CD copies via Bandcamp. And I think it's so important to support independent musicians like Colm and Susan. These days we listen to so much fantastic music, but it's not always easy for an artist to make money to pay for the costs of recording, production, album releases, especially now in COVID times where there are no gigs in this part of the world. A lot of the money and the income's going to the likes of Spotify and the company owners and not necessarily to the artists. So you'll understand why I am keen to promote Susan and to encourage as many people as possible to get behind her debut album, really give it a good old push out into the world. It's a stunning piece of art and it's available on Bandcamp. and through Apple, Spotify, and her website, susanquirk.com, susanquirk.com. Obviously, free to stream on Spotify if you're a member of that and all the rest, but the artist doesn't tend to make any money off that. So please do support where you can. Bandcamp is probably one of the best ways to get it. And the same goes for Colm. Check out his incredible repertoire at colmmaconiomaire.com. And Susan is susanquirk.com and susanquirk.bandcamp.com. So thanks for supporting the music, and also a big thanks, as always, to you podcast patrons who chip in to support and help grow this podcast to reach people all over the world. You can chip in, price a cup of coffee or whatever you feel on a once-off or monthly basis at loveandcourage.org. And I really appreciate all the support to help share important voices like Colm's that I believe we need to get out into the world during these turbulent times. And finally, before we get started, if you don't mind, make sure you're subscribed, rate, review, and share the podcast only if you feel inclined. There's never any pressure, of course. It just helps get these great voices and lots of wisdom and good vibes out into the world. So I know you're keen to get started, so let's get going. This conversation with the brilliant Colm Mac Con Iomaire. Colm, you're very welcome to the Love and Courage podcast. You're joining me from a sunny morning in Wexford. Although it's sunny all the time in Wexford, I believe.
We don't have any nighttime at all. In fact, it's 24-hour sun. Rory, what can I tell you?
I'm sitting here getting soaked and blown out of it in west coast of Ireland in Clare, and I dream of Wexford, the Costa del Southeast.
The shampoo and set here and you get the blow dry.
But it's a beautiful part of the world, and you're joining me from, I think, do you call it your studio room, or what do you call it?
Oh yeah, it's my studio. You can drift in and out of the kitchen easy enough.
So for those that maybe aren't watching the video and listening on audio, you're surrounded by guitars, piano, CDs, books, a fiddle, violin. There's a picture on the wall there behind you. I'm curious.
It's me. Yeah, it's a bit like laughing. It's a bit like having Saddam Hussein portraits everywhere.
So therefore, you must explain.
Well, just it's a portrait that Jane Brightson, a friend, sent me a couple of years ago, very graciously, and so. But throughout the house, I've been painted a few times, so it's a bit.
Oh, so it actually is you.
It is me, yeah.
Okay, because it looks like a historical figure, so I'm actually.
Well, need I say more? Yeah.
Great, that's wonderful. So, Colm, how is life for you these days? Are you deep in the music, or is it more family time, or is it a mix of both?
I think it's always a mix of both. Thankfully, I'm, I've been very fortunate since the Corona turn, to be in a situation where there was, work ahead of me at that stage, and then more stuff has come in. So, and I've been able to do all of that from here. So, it's been good. And obviously, I haven't traveled like I would usually, or stuff like that have been curtailed. But I've traveled plenty in my life, and I'm sure I'll travel some more later on as well. So I haven't minded it. Yeah.
So you ultimately probably started traveling extensively in your early 20s, was it, with the Frames? Would that have been the beginning? Yeah,
well, I joined the Frames when I was 19. So since then, I suppose it's been, touring. Certainly, we got into America maybe in the mid to late 90s, and then certainly through the 2000s, we'd be over to America a couple of times a year, Australia every year, around Europe. And then later on in the 2010s, then, or at the end of the 20s, we went to interesting places like Japan and Korea and Brazil and, Mexico and the more exotic places.
And were you aware at that time as a young man that this was an enormous adventure and a privilege, or were you just in it, or were you reflecting while you were in it?
Absolutely, yeah. It's interesting because it's kind of been a continuation of my it's like the busking odyssey just kind of rolled on, and it's something that kind of woke me, or that I think once when I was 15, myself and Owen Dillon, the piper in Kila, we decided. I suppose Liam and Fiachna had been a couple of years ahead of us in school, and they'd been busking with the Benzini brothers, and it seemed like, sure, it's something we might, give a try. And so we started busking then around town, Grafton Street, and then the Abbey Mall and Abbey Street and Henry Street, and through that I ended up meeting all of this other tribe that I wouldn't have otherwise met. The likes of Glenn Hansard, and Mick Christopher and Mark Dignam and a host of other people. And I think from then on, I was just kind of running the clock down at school. So there was the kind of study and exams would have gone out the window, really. And I think, so I think by the time I managed to I scraped through my leaving, and then decided to, I think it was, I was convinced to repeat my leaving. And I was 2 weeks into repeating my leaving when I got offered a place in UCD, and which I took. And I'm really glad, actually, because those 2 weeks were the darkest 2 weeks of my life. The whole idea of having to go back to prison, just after having escaped. And then I suppose the music would have been a lot of that college year as well. And then, so then what happened? Oh yeah, then the Frames happened, and I took a year off college, and that was that.
That was that. 25 years more later.
Yeah.
20.
Oh yeah, and the rest. 30.
30. Oh God.
Yeah, I think it is 30. It's over 30.
Wow. You mentioned Mick Christopher there, but before you did, I was thinking of this. I had a visual in my mind of all of these, which are now, you're all sort of at some level, you're veterans and stalwarts, the Hot House Flowers and the Kila lads and so on. But I had a sense of this kind of glorious time in Dublin, it sounded like a moment, and I was like, wow, that's like the heyday or something. And then the Mick Christopher song Heyday came to mind. Yeah,
well, indeed. And I think that was probably I think a lot. I think at this stage we appreciate the time more, because at the time, obviously, it was. Actually, we were definitely. There was nothing else we would have preferred to do, or that we wanted to be doing, than that sense of kind of collective learning that was happening, and the camaraderie and the excitement of new skills and harmonies. And it was kind of like the Alan Parker fame thing. Do you know what I mean? Without it being kind of twee, and there was a lot of late nighting and exploration, and Night Town and the Manhattan at 3 a.m, and it was just wonderful, wonderful time of being a teenager into a young adult, and also just being aware as well as a musician that it gives you a kind of a passport through generational kind of gates, so that so it's like from age 15, for example, or 16, maybe, Kila got a residency in the Bagot Inn upstairs in the Bagot during the week, and we were kind of doing which was, for us, the Bagot Inn was this legendary kind of venue, obviously, that all of our heroes played in, like Christie and Moving Hearts. And
you were in Kila at this time, because I think not everyone would know.
Sorry, Kila was our school band that myself and Russa and Ronan and Owen Dillon started. Russa and Ronan Osnuddy. And so in that, so we had a residence, and then we're getting up in the morning to go to school. So quite quickly, the idea of like, well, which would you prefer to do? It just was such a kind of clear choice of what was more interesting and exciting. And at the same time, we had no idea how you would convert that into something more formal but I think, we were very committed and passionate and, what's the word? Yeah, we were just like we spent a lot of time working on the music and improving and learning but it was great time.
The fact that you were so committed and dedicated, it strikes me in some ways that, there's in many ways an overemphasis on what's seen as formal education or established or mainstream education, but essentially you were embarked upon education or an apprenticeship into an entirely different vocation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's something that I appreciate since as well, is that, knowing that for so much, it's interesting, like when you're raising kids yourself as well, just trying to get them to do stuff or the stuff that you think they should be doing. And, being reminded of how, like, being my own obstinacy at the same age as regards, trying to convince me to do something that I didn't want to do, or how the handbrake would go on and be like kind of pushing a parked car, or, you may as well throw your hat at it, whereas it's far better to kind of just try and expand the range of interests and to see what catches are. And it's such an accelerated and kind of concentrated and potent learning period as well. I think that kind of decade between 14 and 24 or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. And you said about going to the States in the 90s, and I was immediately struck by the notion that this was perhaps a golden era there as well for indie rock. Or was it? Was it the mid-90s, late 90s? When?
Yeah, you think of the grunge thing and all?
Yeah, I'm thinking West Coast and like...
Yeah, unfortunately, we didn't make it out to the West Coast until later, a bit later, like maybe 97 or 98.
Okay.
So it was for us, it was more like the circuit was more of a kind of East Coast, New York.
Yeah.
Philly, Boston,
Yeah.
But then actually, it was from 2000 then, we did some recording in Chicago with Steve Albini, and that just kind of transformed things for us. And we met up with our American manager, Howard Grenells, over there, and he had a label called Overcoat, and he'd been working with Thrill Jockey. And just suddenly that kind of plugged us into a whole center of hive of activity in independent music in America, just through Touch and Go. Corey at Touch and Go then put out For the Birds in America, and it had been done with Steve, and had been half recorded in Chicago and half in, Kilvik Downig and the West Kerry Gaeltacht. And yeah, I think that was a real kind of second coming, a feeling of a kind of a new lease of life, having spent our first decade with kind of major labels and invariably, connected to the city of London, and having a very kind of United Kingdom version of events as regards what you should be doing creatively and where you should be playing. And so, yeah, it felt quite a lot at that time. It's a lot of learnings happened, and so that we could convert later into kind of how not to do things.
Okay. And is there any particular lessons that you would zone in on there in terms of, often it's the case that we just have to stumble, fall, and find our way out. But, is there any particular ones that you feel that are important for others to maybe keep an eye on as they...
For young people, yeah, I think there is. I think, well, maybe it's a generational thing as well. Maybe it's a thing that's less the case now, because my experience of young people now is that they're far more present, they're far more grounded, they're far more assured, perhaps than we were raised in the 70s as we were. So I think there was for us there was an element of kind of deference to people who are older than you in the business, assuming that they knew what they were doing, that they knew best, that they knew what the best thing to do is. When it came to, I mean, whether things could have been different if we complained more, I don't think so. Once you sign the contract, it's a case of, it's the horse is bolted.
Yeah.
In many ways, and you have to kind of make of a situation the best you can. But yeah, and also, I mean, it was a real kind of a learning curve for us going from street musicians to professional recording musicians, which is a whole other trade and craft. And yeah, so I think just it took us a good 10 years to kind of get used to that engineering aspect and how you could, feel comfortable in a studio and, start to drive the car yourself rather than be in the back seat of it.
And how, excuse me, how were you with all the razzmatazz and the buzz and the high octane stuff? Obviously, well, you're someone who strikes me as fairly well grounded and rooted and keep your feet on the ground. But, it's when you're in your 20s and flying at that pace and you're on stages and after parties and all the rest, did you have your center?
No, I think I think I'm recently back in my body. I think I spent a lot of my life not quite in my feet, as I say. I think it was actually only about age 40 or so that I felt that I was kind of properly here, 100%, as in that I was, and it's an intangible thing to define. But I think I would have, I suppose I was way in the music.
Yeah.
And in that kind of the life of a traveling touring musician, which is constant movement. I mean, we're circus people, essentially, modern day circus people. And and I do prefer now, and it's actually, life is a lot easier since I've made peace with my being here.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a case you need to fly up into the sky to have a good look at below and decide that it's pretty good down there.
No, for sure. And I think, and obviously, life happens to us whether we want to or not. And that events, whether, arrivals of children and, departures of loved ones, all of these things kind of inform us and of the frailty of everything and the beauty of everything and the ephemeral nature of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Colm, I'm just going to ask for the video purposes, if you have a light there, could you just bring it a little bit forward?
Sure.
It's gone a little bit dark there. That lovely Wexford sunshine is drifted backwards. Can you talk to me, Colm, about when love and marriage came into the mix, and how and where and how that then flowed with the music. Obviously, your wife Sheila is an artist, so I'm imagining that there was an artistic connection somewhere, or maybe not. I've no idea where you met.
Yeah, well, when I met Sheila, she was both of us were going out with different people, and that sounds awkward, doesn't it? But we were all friends, and as a case, it wasn't until later then that when neither of us were going out with anybody that we the friendship got deeper, shall we say?
Yeah.
And I think when you meet the person, who the person is, you don't know until you know, kind of thing. And but ultimately, I suppose it's the best sort of friendship there is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you meet your match, and that it's not like it's somebody that you don't have to be anybody other than yourself with, which is great.
I can certainly identify with a lot of that on a few different levels. And then children, Colm, like how long were you together when the baby
That's
started?
A good question. Yeah, I think we got together. It was the 1999. I was living in Galway. I'd moved to Galway a couple of months before, and then Darach arrived in 2003. So yeah, so it's a decent courtship, like.
Yeah. Good stuff.
And then Oisín arrived in 2005, and now so Darach will be 18 this year, and Oisín just turned 16 in February.
Yeah, they're men.
They are men. They surely are.
Yeah. So you mentioned Galway. I'm taking a punt that might have been Galway City, but I know that your roots are very much, I think, Roscommon, but very much also Connemara.
Yeah, Leitrim and Connemara.
Leitrim,
yeah. Nothing against Roscommon, but I was living in the Claddagh. I spent 2 years living in the Claddagh, and which were great. I think it was great. Is important. It's important to leave where you're from, and I think moving out of Dublin, having spent kind of good 10 years in Dublin 6 or 8 or whatever, the flatlands essentially, just to have a new experience, and kind of so I think then 2 years in Galway cut the umbilical with Dublin, and then that brought more freedom when I did move back to Dublin. Then myself and Sheila, we lived in Ranelagh again, and in lovely Palmerston Road, and a great flat there. And then the frames manager Claire was moving over from England, and we were both looking around us, I suppose. And you have to consider it was the Celtic Tiger was in progress at the time, and the prospects of finding somewhere to settle down in a long-term sort of fashion, we kind of decided to broaden the search. So we looked at the different bowls of porridge in front of us, and Wexford was the Goldilocks, or was the perfect thing. So Claire and ourselves moved down, and we rented a place for a year by the sea in Kilmuckridge, which is idyllic. And then we bought a rundown cottage on an acre that had no electricity or running water, and I'm in it.
Yeah.
This is it. Yeah.
Lovely. What do you feel that Wexford has given you in terms of that relocation from Dublin, where you grew up, and you would have spent a lot of time in urban environments, but you're now very much I don't know what they call them, Wexicans, I think.
Yeah, exactly. A blow-in. Wexicans, yeah. I see. I've always had a strange I've never quite been the urban person. I mean, or the metropolitan thing. I do like cities, definitely, but would I live in one? Definitely not. Having had that experience. I mean, I think, life is about having experiences and it coming to different points where you kind of decide whether you want to repeat the experience or have you had your dose, So having spent most of my childhood summers either in Leitrim or Connemara, I was definitely knew, that the countryside was something that was appealing to me always, rather than something that was strange or foreign. So would have saving the hay or foot and turf, or making poutine out on the hill in Connemara, or there would have been adventure, and so I suppose the countryside represented freedom to me always, rather than it being that so about the city. So Wexford, here I am. And Wexford is lovely, it's kind of obviously you couldn't afford to move to Wicklow because it's a bit fancier, but I think the Wexford's the better for that, because a lot of the fancy people stay in Wicklow.
Until the artists move to Wexford and make it all.
This is it, yeah. I know.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of Temple Bar as it used to be when we were starting off in Kila. The CIE bus depot that it was, and all these derelict buildings with rehearsal rooms and different bands rehearsing in them, with PAs and kind of, yeah. And then how it all gets developed, that wonderful euphemism for something.
Yeah, I guess the so-called cultural quarter that is now a headquarters for McDonald's. And
is it really? Yeah. Well, I suppose it's. I mean, do you know what it's? Yeah.
Not necessarily that building, but
it's funny because it's very. I was in Nolans last year, or I suppose it's late 2018 or June 2018. I was in New Orleans, and again, and it's like, have you been there? It's like the Temple Bar is just Bourbon Street.
Yeah.
It just could be, and which is really, and the Bourbon Street similarly is just as jaded and washed out. It's like a once colourful garment that's been had too many hot washes. All brown.
Yeah, I had that sense of going to the likes of Prague, and I think tourism does that. It can take the thing it seeks to celebrate almost.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it kind of and oftentimes it's well, maybe it's a case of I think it's true, but scenes as well. I mean, artistic scenes as well. Generally, by the time the press show up, I mean, it's the thing is gone,
Yeah.
The electricity has moved, or maybe it's a quantum thing that it changes when you observe it, or whatever the thing is. But anyway, yeah, it's the best thing we ever did anyway, is move to Wexford. And I think because of that move, I'm just kind of mindful of privilege, and the reason we could do that move was because the Frames had happened to have 2 or 3 consecutive good years, a series of good years, and we were independent at this stage, which meant that that we actually got the benefits of it, and because of that success for a couple of years, that the banks actually gave us a mortgage, whereas wouldn't be the case for most musicians. So, and also because it's a small mortgage relative to the mortgages that are being given out today, it just affords us a life here it affords me a creative life that is more full of choice and discernment, rather than feeling like I have to take everything on and do nothing as well as I would like to, which I think can be the case, and you can get burnt out very quickly and get disillusioned. And
I know that path fairly well, and it speaks to me very much on the topic of housing and how fundamental it is to housing oneself and one's soul and family and nurturing yourself. And if that is in any way unachievable or insecure, it has a kind of there's an instability there that doesn't allow for perhaps other things to emerge. And in this context, creativity. And, I think there's sometimes a terrible romanticization of the struggling poor artist and how it's wonderful for their art.
Yeah. Bollocks.
Double bollocks.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I remember being struck by that in New York, when in the 90s, where everybody's got the hustle going, and the different musicians that are kind of carting their double bass or they're with their amplifier and rushing around between one gig and another, and they're finishing their half-hour slot here and they've got 2 more to do in the evening, and and it's all just this frenzied, frantic kind of thing. And it's a very attractive energy on one level, but if you're to examine it and realize that it just actually and seeing the effect it has on the musicians, that they become far more oriented, economically oriented, perhaps, than and I just think that becomes the kind of the driving motive, and it's an paying the rent is an existential kind of issue. But I suppose in America it's so extreme, where over there it's kind of a case of like everybody has to work 3 jobs to pay the insurance in case something happens. And working 3 jobs it's just a matter of time before something happens, because something is going to give somewhere. So it's very, very, I've no illusions about America, having spent as much time over there as we have, because we would have done coast to coast tours for, a couple of tours a year, and seeing the places that go unseen, and the disparities and the hardship, and just the way that's kind of the pyramid scheme of it all, so, and I suppose that's one of the benefits of traveling a lot, is that I've come to appreciate the incredible place that we live, which is Ireland.
Do you worry that how that pyramid scheme has in some ways infected?
Oh yeah.
Or
do I? Yeah.
It's not just infected, but been welcomed as well.
Oh, it's a franchise that's been sold, and I was thinking about it earlier as well, that it's no surprise that, a lot of our politicians are probably groomed in this from doing, some work experience in Capitol Hill, or, getting this kind of buzz of this, activity, changing the world, idealism, and unwittingly can actually, it's kind of like being growing up in a corridor that you can only move in its particular direction, so it's an interesting thing. But I do worry. But I mean, I think ultimately politicians and politics follow the people rather than vice versa. And I think once you kind of remember that, and it becomes ever more clear to me, as each year goes by.
How do you feel the pyramid contrasts with an alternative vision or version of life, and particularly a more Gaelic version or a more Irish or ancient, or perhaps some of what you experienced as a child in Connemara, that kind of Mehel culture?
It's funny, as somebody raised as an Irish speaker in Ireland, in Dublin, I've always had this kind of other Sulella, as T.G. Cahar uses as a phrase, another eye. It's another perspective. It's another view. It struck me that it's as a, in a monoglot culture, languages are like operating systems, or they're like versions of events, or they're realities unto themselves. So it's really important to learn another language, be it, French or German or whatever, just so that you can actually, they're almost like planets. And by having a second language, not only do you gain a second language, but you get to actually step off one language and get a 360 view of the language that you've just left behind. So yes, there's a huge, one of the things I've always been aware of is that what's being lost, but also what's there in plain sight, and what's being squandered, what's being ignored, what's being neglected, as regards the arts, or there's Dara.
Right.
Hello, Darek, special guest in the podcast. You're very welcome.
1 second now.
How are you keeping, Darek?
Can I hear it?
Oh, 1 second. Will you hear him now?
Right.
Yeah, we can hear okay, yeah. And I
Oh,
think
1 second.
we have a
Let me
cast
see how
joining
I'll
us as well, do we?
The sound's not on.
I know, yeah. 1 second. How are we going to hear Rory?
Can you hear me now?
The sound's not on.
It is, you see, but do you know what I'll do? I can put my headphones. There you go. Now you'll hear. No. Just put on for a second. Then you'll be able
So
to.
Darek had joined us for a previous event. I think it was my book launch.
1 sec.
And he's become an increasing star of the show. He's appeared in some of Colm's live gigs, live from the studio as well.
Oh,
How are you, Darek? Good to have you on the podcast.
Right.
You're looking well.
Yeah.
I'd say you're taller than the alpha now, are you?
Well, we're gonna walk with it.
Are you going to give us any tunes or stories here?
Actually, the ship provided.
Yeah, we moved the sheep earlier on today.
Yep, we did.
Yeah.
And then the ship is still up in the pond. Still in the pond.
Yeah.
So I have to go up and find out what is the left hand counts.
That's right. We're going to move them back down to the field, I think, after. You're going to let me back to my interview, or what do you think?
We're going ahead.
It's not easy being a farmer in Wexford.
You can make the family back there.
I can't hear what Rory's saying there.
No, yeah,
Derek's talking about all the farm work he's been doing.
No, I'll be all right.
I know. You wait. We'll go up together. Okay.
You're going to have to fight for them headphones back, Colm.
That's 32. See you soon.
Good luck. Good to see you.
Thanks, brother.
See you, Darek. Thanks.
Thanks, Dar.
Thanks for joining us.
Is there a special guest?
Special guest. He's having a peek back in. So I think I learned before, Colm, that Derek's he's benefited an awful lot from the connection with local farmers. I think perhaps that, or one in particular, is it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we live at a crossroads here on the side of a hill in North County Wexford, and our neighbours next door have a big farm which is all around us, and they have cattle and sheep. And Darach's favourite thing in the world is to move cattle and sheep or to be working with them. So because we live at a crossroads, they're often moving the cattle, and they give us a ring.
Yeah.
This has kind of developed over the past kind of 15 years, where there are any children there, you can stick in a gap somewhere to. So we've ended up developing this lovely friendship with them, and so we, especially at this time of year where it's lambing season, so there's a daily routine of heading up to theirs next door and getting the ewes and the lambs in at night and feeding the other ones that are out and counting them and moving them around, and the cattle as well. So it's lovely. It's fantastic.
It's been a massive part of Darach's social development as well, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. That whole idea of, I think, and through Darach is an assistance dog called Cassie, and Cassie came into our life when Darach was 7, and she's actually just was a total game changer for him and for us.
Yeah.
There's something about anybody who has pets will attest to the benefits that, the calming influence that four-leggeds can have on a human metabolism is remarkable, really. And I suppose when it comes then to working with flocks of sheep or cattle, herds of cattle, it's just great. And you get a great confidence from, working with cattle and the big animals that they are, and we have a pony in the back garden as well. So his name is Bobby. So between that, it's great. Really, that's kind of it's subtle, the effect, but really deep and profound is the benefits of how horses or large beasts can settle you and give you confidence.
Yeah, it's Fragile X syndrome. Is that that's what Dara's diagnosis is?
That's his diagnosis, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm kind of have this sense now that, there's obviously a socio-medical support system or should or could be, but there is another version of that is the community support around that, whether it be animals, farmers, community, neighbors. And for me, I'm kind of thinking of the importance of that all-inclusive community where all abilities, perspectives, dimensions are all welcomed and involved.
For sure, yeah. And I think it was something that was always in Irish culture, and every community had somebody who was slightly different, and
just like all in because we're just not.
Oh, great! They're all sorted then.
We get one thing perfect.
Would you like to, Darach? Would you like to bring in one of the chicks and show Rory? What do you think?
Wait.
We're going to get some live chick.
Yeah. Not the chicks you expected, ladies and gentlemen.
No dad jokes here, Colm, please.
Okay, boomer. We have some day-old chicks. Well, they're 2-week-old chicks at this stage, inside, as part of the next thing, because lambing season will come to an end, so that'll kind of taper off, and so the new chicks are kind of part of the next project to keep Darach involved. So that's great. But yeah, talking about the integration, it's a natural part of most communities, and thankfully, we've had this conversation before where the education system has come on kind of leaps and bounds in the past 10 years of integrated education, and people of different people getting educated together, and how that enriches the community. Okay, Darach, couldn't there send you? Oh, my friend. Who have you got?
So
I'll give you the headphones.
Drum roll for some.
Okay,
wow, we've got a little chick coming on screen here. I don't know how I can do an audio commentary on a baby chick coming on screen, but
Isn't she lovely?
So that's a couple of days old.
That's I'd say probably a week or 10 days old.
10 days old.
Okay, okay, you can put it back now.
Oh, you can really see the connection he has with the
yeah.
And
Good
Colm,
man.
I had the benefit and privilege of listening to I guess you might call it an audio essay that you created recently, and there was a reference to day-old chicks and that from your old childhood.
Great. Okay. Will you do me a favor? Will you do the dishwasher? You've emptied the dishwasher, right? That's your right job. Okay. Right. So we'll chat more later, will we? Okay.
Yeah,
you were saying.
I'm thinking of the chicks column that that there was something about, might even been at this. Maybe you were younger, you know. What age were you when you did that trip into Inishmaan Island?
Yeah, that was I was 10.
You were 10, so yeah.
I had my 11th birthday out in Inishmaan. I did a 3-month, lived with the family for 3 months out there as part of a course at 3V. They call it a Violinist scholarship. And as you're saying, I recently recorded a kind of an essay for a podcast called The Shaking Bog. So that goes out soon, I think next week or next week. But it was one of those kind of hugely formative experiences as a 10-year-old to kind of go and live on an island with people you'd never met before and go to school with their family and become an islander essentially for 3 months and then going back home, then leaving, and the and then fitting back into where you'd come from. So it's just an essay about all of those things, and but the day-old chicks obviously fit into it as well.
Yeah, you're right back into Dublin with these. It was a great part. I'd encourage anyone to look it up. It's going to be The Shaking Bog. That's
it. Yeah.
The Shaking Bog. So it'll be out soon. So keep an eye out for that. But there's a beautiful scene or passage in it where you're talking about the train back to Dublin from Galway with these day-old chicks and everybody oohing and ahhing at these chicks, and also then the reflection of being a father and a parent, and reflecting on, you know, your past and now their present, and, you know, all the different connections of the generation. There was a beautiful moment in it as well about your own father and his visit to you at that time. And
yeah, he came out. He was like working for RTE, and it's unbeknownst to me, like the days before, like mobile technology. So I kind of heard that he was on the island before I knew that he might be there, and not having, you know, been away from home for maybe 2 months at this stage, and you know, meeting him and that whole kind of excitement, and then he was at work, so he had to head off to do an interview somewhere, and then later on waiting up for him, and so the following day anyway, we went around the island, and I brought him around the island essentially and showed him all of my birds' nests, and which it's what we did when we were that age over there. Everybody would have their collection of birds' nests that they'd keep secret from the other people, and you'd watch the eggs appear and watch them hatch, and so it was lovely. It was fun. It was absolutely idyllic time. And then of course later on when I grew up into my 20s, he was then reminding me of it and telling me how moved he was for him to re-experience his childhood of the 1940s in Connemara, because that's exactly what they used to do when he was a kid, and how that kind of rolls through into our life here in, you know, rural Ireland where we get to move cattle and sheep around the place, and we've hens and go out and collect the eggs, and mind the pony.
Ponies need minding.
Well, they need feeding is what they need.
Yeah, exactly. Do you feel that being around what we call a rural life or a farming life, and the different creatures and plants and so on, do you feel like the ecosystem has really sort of helped your own music come to the fore beyond the frames, that is, where your solo voyage began?
Yeah, I think it has. I mean, I think the whole idea of like the music as opposed to the music business. I think I was very, very happy to be far away from the music business. Still living where I am, and the whole kind of celebrity culture, and I think we were always kind of wise to it as regards how vacuous it was, and also how distorting it is to it. Kind of it's a reality distorting phenomena that kind of fucks with your vision and your sense of reality. So living where we live is just the perfect kind of antidote. So for all of the touring that you would have done in those years, coming back here and collecting the hen's eggs, or whatever it is, and the kids keep you grounded as well. It's like there's no kind of indulgence about it. It's a real there's an element of surrender about the whole thing that is very healthy, I think, and that has a knock on your creativity, and it's such a holistic thing. I think the whole idea of where music comes from, I definitely kind of think it's something, rather than it being kind of talent based, or I mean, obviously it comes down to ability of talent, but it's something that it's not like kind of it's not something you strip mine. It has to be kind of nurtured and rested and not plundered.
Very much like the earth.
Well, absolutely, yeah. And I think there's so many parallels. Just thinking, a month ago, when a lot of the surrounding land was being prepared for the ploughing, all the fields have been sown now and the crops have been sown, but some farmers use just it's chemical warfare. You just see these kind of vast acres of just burnt. It's a particular color. You'll see it in the field. It's kind of like a reddish brown color, and what it is actually just fields that have been poisoned. It just breaks down all of the root structures and whatever things growing that makes it easier for the ploughing to happen. And unfortunately, it also just completely leaches the soils of nutrients and kills off all of the good kind of connective microbiology. And I remember seeing a couple of years ago a telling photograph of how you used to see say a horse-drawn plow, and it was like a kind of a trawler with loads of seagulls following it, and even tractors. You'd have all these kind of birds swooping and kind of eating all of the grubs that were in the soil after in its wake. And nowadays, if you're to look at most fields, there's none of that, because there's nothing in the soil to eat. So it's kind of like politics, modern day politics. It's all about short-termism. It's about cash crops. It's about maximizing yield, and it's about it really, we aren't thinking, about our grandchildren, about our great grandchildren. So we're actually this whole sick, sick culture is, again, it's that kind of the pyramid franchise. It is really about greed and maximizing yields year on year and not resting things. So it's just setting. It's no wonder that we are where we are, but with being suddenly here in this pandemic, I think gives us an opportunity to perhaps start doing things differently. And that's also the parallels as well with the Me Too movement, misogyny, how we treat kind of, Mother Earth and the patriarchy and the needing to dominate. And all of those things are questions that we're asking at the moment and hopefully going to, come up with some answers about.
Do you feel like, it's often said that COVID is a great revealer. Do you think we're in the kind of revelation time where we get to see the kind of truth, the reality, the pain of what's happened and what is happening with a view to
change? In some way, I think it's pivoted or it's changed over the course of the pandemic, because I think there was a public part of it where everybody was together, and then maybe it's like a grief process where you have that initial shock where everybody's kind of galvanized and unified, and then it changes to something far more private, where people are processing their own grief. So it's an interesting thing, and also, there's huge amounts of pain. I think there's a lot of people dealing with. I suppose it's a bit like the pass the parcel, and that the music is stopped, and depending on where you are, if you've got a chair, or if you don't have a chair, musical chairs, whatever, mixing my metaphors, and just the amount of hardship. It's very angering when you consider the amount of, just a government's ability to privatize everything, to turn everything into a business, whether that be homelessness or direct provision, that you need to find a way to get yourself off the hook, and to that money that, the social money manages inevitably, inexorably to find its way into private pockets for anything to happen. And lo and behold, go figure what happens when things are, when things are based around maximizing profits. It's not going to end well for the people, for the clients that are involved. So it's housing. I think there's a real reckoning in the country. I think it's been a long time coming. I think a lot of people complain about Irish people, that they're really, docile, and I don't think we're docile. I think we're actually very savvy, I think, and discerning. And I think I think the referenda recently of, again, it goes back to politics follows the people. And I'm optimistic about that, I think.
Going back to the kind of global perspective on it all, I'm reminded that you did a trip to Gaza.
Yeah, well, it's actually the West Bank.
Oh, it was the West Bank.
Yeah, I was to go to Gaza, but there was an incident which made travel unwise and unavailable. There'd been some sort of explosion or attack. That was incredible trip in November 2018. where I went over with as part of Narrative 4, an organization that works with students in schools in all parts of the world. It's an empathy building process program based around a thing called a story exchange. So I tell you a story, a meaningful story. You tell me your meaningful story. We go back to a group. I introduce myself as you and tell your story to the group. And I listen to you tell my story. And it's one of those, it was originally one of those actor workshop devices or training. But it's one of these, the effects of it are really profound when you put, teenagers together or different age groups together. And they get to kind of just completely connect with complete strangers on such a deep level, on a basic human level. So yeah, I was invited over with Narrative 4, and we went and spent a week between Israel and Palestine, and met incredible people. People from Breaking the Silence, which is an organization of former IDF personnel who decided a couple of years ago to start telling the truth about the occupation, of the real nature of it. And they're incredibly courageous people. And then people from the Parents Circle, Colm Mac Con, who's the founder of Narrative 4, wrote a novel called A Paragon, which is based around the true story of two fathers, Rami and Bassam. Rami is an Israeli from Tel Aviv, and Bassam is from, where's he from? He's from Jerusalem, and Palestinian. And both of them have lost. Their daughters were murdered. One by a bomb, a suicide bomber, and the other by an Israeli soldier. A little girl just shot outside her school. So they became friends. They were friends already, and they became deeper friends. And they are involved in this organization called the Parents Circle, which is people from both sides of the divide over there, working together and just basically putting it up to politicians about kind of the need for humanity, compassion, the injustice that is the occupation, the tyranny of it. And it was really powerful experience to be there, and it was a great privilege to be that part of the world. Yeah. So I've been very inspired by that. So I'm kind of in, my next record is kind of in process, and that'll feature heavily in it as regards just inspired from Colm's book and Rami and Bassam. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back over there.
I think there's a particular affinity as well between, I don't know if this is your sense of it, but there tends to be an affinity between Irish people or Irish history and Palestine and occupation, oppression, voice. But, I think when you look at whether it be Native America or so many other parts of the world, it's almost the story of much of humanity, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of we understand. There's so much kind of there's the lived experience of it's a fascinating place in that way, where it's so there's so many levels of Irish history happening simultaneously, in the West Bank at the moment. It's kind of like the flight of the Earls and the settlement of Ulster is happening daily, with the persecution of different Palestinians and the settlement of new Israelis from different parts of Eastern Europe on Palestinian land, and how the Palestinians are having their homes bulldozed, or there's no room for the Palestinians to build anything new. They need a permit. And of course, no permits are available. And at the same time, Palestinian land is getting given away to strangers from different countries, and they're invited in to these extraordinary luxurious housing complexes with swimming pools and served by what they call fabric of life roads. It's a whole motorway road network that's for Israelis only. I mean, it's just, and I think it's fascinating from the Israelis that I met over there as well. Israelis for the most part will never set foot in the West Bank because it's a no-go area. I mean, all of the signs are there in Hebrew, and do not enter if you're Israeli, because this is, there be dragons is what it is. You're in danger of losing your life, and that may be very well true. But at the same time, without witnessing it, without going there to see what's happening, it means that the Israeli government have been able to create the reality for Israelis, create the narrative. They've no way of questioning that, because there's no alternative to it as regards witnessing it. So, yeah, it was a very, very powerful place to go. And obviously, I think Colm mentioned before, I remember him saying that the outside of Israel, the next highest place for the sale of Israeli flags is in Belfast. So, I mean, that's the whole kind of I suppose the loyalists would align with the Israeli occupiers, and the nationalists very much have always felt a connection with the occupied.
Well, it certainly speaks to the importance of bringing our history and our present into a global perspective. And I think what I love about the work that you do through your music and otherwise is that you're very much rooted in the ancient, in the indigenous, but it's not an insular journey, that it's one that brings with it indigenous cultures from all over. And
yeah, I mean, I think that that's kind of like, we're kind of as a colonized people, we're kind of fed from a very young age to think of our own culture as being something not important, or something less than, or something kind of peasant related. You hear this kind of, there's this kind of trope about, the noble peasant bullshit, if you want to visit the National Museum of Ireland and have a look at the art, what our ancestors were doing. When I go into Trinity and look at what we were writing when the rest of Europe was in darkness, do you know what I mean? So there's a huge, for empires to exist, relies on the crushing of self-esteem and dignity. And there was famously in Wales they hung the harpers, because the harp, they were the things that lifted the hearts. So they an edict went out, and let's hang the harpers, and are pulling their fingernails out, or there's so I think there's a and without, and I think there's an inherent dignity and connection between Indigenous peoples throughout the world. Also an innate understanding of how to interact in a sustainable fashion with your environment.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of something that we are kind of slowly, I think, returning to. And we obviously need to do that a lot quicker and on a bigger scale.
Yeah, I think there's wonderful documentaries made about the Kogi people in Colombia, and it's I think there was one originally made by the BBC in the 70s, and they talk about little brother being the Western man, predominantly is a man, but Western people, Western so-called, as Gandhi said about Western civilization, isn't it what they asked him, what did he think of Western civilization? And he said they should try it sometime, as in civilization. But the fact that we're tearing down our own house in terms of nature and ecology is the bottom line here. And we're at the moment of the reckoning, and there is a quickening, and it's either a doomsday quickening or a glorious kind of recalibration, reemergence. And I think in all of this, we're going to need a soundtrack as well. So, and music being a cultural force, of course. So, I just want to thank you for, helping. It was amazing at the start of the pandemic, people were in shock. And I remember actually being in Dublin, and I haven't been in Dublin since because we can't, but your music just took off during the pandemic, and it just was clear that there was a resonance there. People needed the healing, they needed what it was speaking to in them. So it's lovely. I mean, it was incredible. It reminded me of the way that people were saying that they were hearing birdsong for the first time. Exactly.
It was which is a lovely thing to be associated with. But
yeah. Well, here's the more bird song.
Amen.
So it's been an absolute pleasure, Colm. I feel like I want to. I'd like to continue this for 6 more hours. I'm sure listeners and viewers would agree. But
the box set.
Yeah, we can't give it to them all at once, or they'd be binging on you.
Geez, I'm exhausted already, Rory. I don't know about you.
I should go and have a lie down there with the donkey and the pony. And listen, Gurmagat, thanks very much, Colm. I really appreciate it. And God bless. Slán.
Slán.
Hello, Rory here again. A big thanks for listening. Now, before you go, we're about to share a song from Susan, so please stay tuned just another moment. And can I ask that you might consider sharing this episode with some friends who might enjoy it? I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I'm keen to get Colm's voice and stories and wisdoms out there. So perhaps you might consider sharing through social media, WhatsApp, email, or whatever way it might appeal. And also subscribe, shares, ratings, reviews for the podcast, all appreciated and important. And the same with chipping in as a patron, even if it's just the price of a cuppa, whatever you can support with is appreciated. You can do so over at loveandcourage.org. And a huge and sincere thanks to all patrons. Please do check out and support Colm's music. Go to colmmacconiomaire.com and be sure to keep an eye out for Susan's new album too. It's called Into the Sea. It's brand new, and you can find her on Bandcamp. It's susanquirk.bandcamp.com, and on her own website as well, susanquirk, QUIRKE.com, and on her various social media channels. Colm's also on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all those various places, as am I. We will end now with a song from Susan. It's called Hold On. It features Colm and many other great musicians on it, and it's dedicated to anyone who might need that extra bit of love right now during these times. I hope you enjoy it, and thanks again for all your support. Until next time, let's get going with the music from Susan Quirk.
Sorry for you, I'm sorry you too. It's not too late to make it through. So hold on, hold each other tight, 'cause tonight's the night you'll give up the fight. You'll make it, but you can't see it yet. Hold on, you'll make it, I promise, yeah. So hold on, hold on. So hold on, hold each other tight. A hand touched a hand, new love takes flight.